What's shaking, everybody? Welcome back to another edition of the Orange Bloods Texas Football YouTube channel. I'm Geoff Ketchum, joined today by Anwar Richardson. We're going to get into trouble today. I can feel it coming a mile away. Okay. But before we get into trouble, I tell you what, you don't even have to do it right now. If you find out at the end of this that we've put ourselves into trouble, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button. We're talking Texas and Texas A&M today on the channel Anwar, in part because it came up as a subject yesterday in our Monday overreaction show, which you can check out on the Orange Bloods channel as well. And once I told you what my hot take was on a Monday, you were like, nope, we're saving that until today.
Because you can't bury the lead. Can't bury the lead.
I know. And we were at a point, we were almost wrapping up and it was going to be this bomb. So Anwar, I will let you take us into this discussion and then we can hot take away. But I have been thinking of metaphors and some background to like how I'm going to approach this since we got off the show yesterday. I would like to think I'm prepared for the fire that I might start. I at least have a few like fire extinguishers on hand.
Okay. So listen, it's come up again, right? And the reason why this story is being discussed once again is I raised this thing that I saw on Gig'em 24/7, and they had this interview with Jimbo Fisher, and Jimbo was he was asked about the potential of possibly doing this, the rivalry. And he kind of dismissed it. I thought I might have it here, but it looks like I need to do some refresh and find something else. I thought I might have it here right now. But long story short was he kind of poo-pooed the idea of it. And this has been one of the things that has kind of bothered me. And I'm about to grab it in a second. Just not seeing this rivalry played. When you figure it just shit's a natural. So this is what he said to Gig'em 24/7. He says, if it's what's best for Texas A&M, and if it's in the Aggies' best interest to be playing the game, I do. He goes, but we're playing in the SEC. We're playing in a great league. It's a great rivalry. There's a lot of history. And if that's what's best for Texas A&M, we'll do it. But right now, the decision was made a long time ago, and we, the football program, have no control over it. There were some things done that are water under the bridge. And I don't know what all of that was, but I know right now there's no way that's going to happen for 10 years or so. In that time, if that's what's best for A&M, we'll do it. We'll do what's best for A&M. And later on, he says in there that they're just not on the radar. And so it's this weird thing. And some of this I will definitely have to defer to you because a lot of this predates me. The rivalry predates me. I got here in 2014. But it's just this whole... They left the SEC, left for the SEC. And so it's kind of like A&M on the A&M side. It's like, there's no need to even worry about Texas and what they're doing over there because we are moved on to greener pastures. That's the argument there. And for Texas fans are like, well, you guys left. So there's really no need for us to play you. But it's very hard to find two in-state rivals that started playing back in the 1900s or whatever this damn thing, got started. And they're just like, nah, we're good on each other. Nah, we don't need each other. And it's not a conference thing because Florida State plays Florida, right? So they're not in the same conference. So you can make it happen. And that was kind of my setup for it. And then you wanted to say the reasons why you felt like it doesn't behoove Texas A&M to ever play Texas going forward. And that's why I was like, hold on. I'll let you have the floor on that one. I, as a general football fan with no ties to either program, just as a general football fan, want to see the game played. But I don't feel like anyone who's a part of it really wants to see the game play.
Well, it's like, where do I start? This thing ultimately comes down to, I think, in any given point in time, which team feels like it needs the game more or wants, and sometimes need translates into once. When this thing first happened, when these two teams first split off, Texas got the last win. And this would have felt a lot different if Texas hadn't won the last time these two teams played. But Texas got the last win. It dominated the rivalry from a one-loss perspective in very one-sided fashion. In terms of major rivalries in the history of college football, the Texas A&M winning percentage advantage that Texas has is far superior to almost every major rivalry that exists. I mean, you can just look them all up, and it's just a little bit. I think maybe I remembered looking this up, and I want to say of all the major rivalries, it was the second most one-sided, but I can't remember which of the ones was above it. But since then, here's the story I wanted to tell, because it is a metaphor for all of this. About 20 years ago, right about the time that orangebloods.com was launching, I was out at a club in Austin. Back then I was still young, right? So you take off 20 of my years, and I was a 25-year-old aspiring person in this industry. And I was still really friendly with a lot of guys that I covered. So, because I had just only recently stopped being a UT student. So one night I was in a club downtown in Austin, and I was talking to, at the time, I was sitting in a group, I was in a bar where the likes of Chris Sims and Bo Scaife and Kyle Shanahan and Roderick Babers, that whole crew kind of ran that particular club after 1 a.m. on the weekends. They rolled in and everything just kind of changed. One night, I'm talking to a friend of mine who's a very former NFL player for the Longhorns. And I was like, man, your life's pretty good. I was like, I was literally at this particular moment, I was like one of those fish that's just feed on whatever the sharks leave behind. I was in this club and I had a little something going, and it was really time and place and overflow of good looking women. And the men that those women wanted were occupied. It was like, okay, well, I'm here. So I'm telling this guy, hey, this is pretty good, because business is looking good for me, and I'm just hanging out in the area. At that moment, he was like, Geoff, look up there at the TV. I look up there at the TV, and a very early Destiny's Child video was playing on the screen. And he goes, do you know that when I was a senior in high school, and I'll leave the names out to protect the innocent.
Okay.
But he was like, when I was a senior in high school, the girl in the video, she liked me. She wanted to go out with me. And I passed on that. And 2 years later, she's in Destiny's Child, or maybe 3 years. I don't remember. I can't even remember exactly the story when this took place. And while he was surrounded by other really good looking women, he was looking at the TV, thinking about the decision that he had made that he couldn't take back.
Okay.
And I think about that with Texas and Texas A&M, because in the reality, choices had to be made when these two teams split apart. And the choice that Texas A&M's choice was obvious. They were the junior. They were the school that was always going to be in the shadow of Texas. And this was their move on the chessboard to no longer be in the shadow of Texas. Now, look, maybe they'll be in the shadow of Alabama. Maybe they'll be in the shadow of LSU, but they would not be in the shadow of Texas within their mind with this move that they were making. This separated them from Texas. At the same time, the SEC really wanted Texas. And if Texas had been a little less, I don't know how to describe the thinking other than to say they believed they were better academically on such different levels than most of the SEC, that they kind of turned their nose up to that and said, that's not what we're about. We're not about the cheating. We're not about aligning ourselves with academic institutions that'll just let about anybody in. They wanted to be more Big Ten, Pac-10 at the time. And they just wouldn't even consider the SEC. They made their decision. They had options. And fast forward a decade later, and being in the SEC is incredibly more valuable than being outside of the SEC right now. And when you look at the position, and the gamble that Texas always made was that it didn't matter what conference they were in as long as they were elite and kicking ass. But they never would have guessed what it would look like to be outside of the SEC and to be completely average for a decade, so that every kid that's a junior and senior in high school can't even really remember Vince Young as a football player. Now, all these years later, every year we do these NFL draft stories, and it's like nobody in the Big 12 got drafted, right? Or the Big 12 underachieved while the SEC as a brand looked huge. And right now, Texas A&M has an advantage over Texas. They have the higher ground. They are in the SEC. Their games, their competition is viewed as more valuable than being in the Big 12. And if you're Texas A&M, what Texas gets in a non-conference home and home back and forth with an SEC team right now is a connection to that brand. When they play when they play Alabama next year, they're going to be able to say, in our non-conference, we had one of these. And they're trying to tell kids, if you want to play Alabama, we'll play Alabama 2 times. You don't have to go to Texas A&M to play Alabama. Texas is 10 years later. Texas is in a trailing position in terms of its conference brand. And if you're Texas A&M, if you are the longtime little brother who never got any attention, and now you're Peter Brady, you're Bobby Brady, and you finally are bigger than Greg. You're finally out of the Greg Brady shadow. You're going to give Greg a hand up that might change his fortunes, that might help them? No. You play that game when you need the help. That's when you want to play it. And right now, Texas looks at Texas A&M. They're in the top 10. They've got a head coach with a national championship on his resume. It's hard hand-to-hand combat in recruiting right now against Texas A&M. It used to be a layup. For a decade and a half, it was a layup. It's not anymore. So if I'm Texas A&M, I'm looking at Texas, and I would never extend that olive branch. Not until the SEC brand is lower, not unless I'm in a position where I feel like it does me more good than it does me bad to play this game. And I just feel like A&M has a leverage advantage over Texas right now. I feel like A&M needs Texas. I'm sorry. I feel like Texas needs that game more than A&M does. And I think A&M knows it.
So let me ask you this, because here's one thing that I always see on orangebloods.com, our message board, and what you'll hear a lot of Texas fans say about A&M, which is A&M, only thing they do is piggyback everybody else in the SEC. They piggyback to their success. So the SEC titles are their titles, right? The SEC draft picks are their draft picks. The SEC success is their success, right? And Texas fans will mock that. Texas fans will scoff at that. Texas fans rip A&M fans for doing those type of things, right? But what I'm questioning and what I want to know from you, Ketch, is, do you think that actually does work to a somewhat of an advantage? Like, no matter how much you want to look down upon it from a recruiting aspect, like we'll start there from a recruiting aspect, does it matter to be able to tell kids, hey, you come to A&M and you're going to be a part of the SEC, and this is what the SEC means? Is that greater than saying, come to Texas because you have the LHN network, you get to play Oklahoma, you're going to play Alabama once a year, LSU, you know what I'm saying? Like, does it as much as people knock A&M fans for piggybacking that success, and we'll get into how A&M has actually gotten good, and actually have a pretty good team this year. Should they not be mocked for that?
Look, I have no issues whatsoever with a Texas fan laughing at a Texas A&M fan when like if an A&M fan's like, SEC had 8 first-round draft picks this year. That was like whatever that is, and you didn't have any part of that. And if you want to laugh at that person because they're piggybacking the league's success, knock yourself out. What I would tell you is this, though. Recruits don't laugh. Recruits buy into it. Recruits, and one of the reasons why is because one of the things that all SEC schools play in recruiting, one of their cards, is the SEC brand. So, if Texas is in a battle with LSU and A&M and let's say Alabama, and let's say like the 5th school is Ohio State, that's a kid's Final 5. 3 of those 5 schools, from a messaging standpoint, is playing that SEC drum every visit. They're saying you're playing against the best. You think of yourself as a future NFL player, you will play against the most NFL players in this league. Week in and week out, your tape will be against the best, and nothing will prepare you for the NFL more. Every single one of those schools will say that. And when you hear that, when 60% of your Final 5 are playing that card, it matters. It absolutely matters. And laugh away. I'm just letting you know that it legitimizes A&M in the minds of recruits in ways that you probably shouldn't laugh at.
Yeah, I mean, I'll pull up the numbers and as far as what they've had. So here becomes the question, though. Then, Ketch, how does Texas, now that all the decisions have been made, the rivalry is probably not going to happen in our lifetime, as much as I want to see it. And people can insult each other, but then from a recruiting standpoint, how does Texas keep up with the Ohio States of the world that can come in here and just handpick what they want? When I say here, I mean the state of Texas, and be able to take that, or Clemson that can go ahead and do that, Alabama that clearly has the ability to do that. And now you're talking about Texas A&M improving from a recruiting standpoint. How does Texas make sure they, I guess in some ways, get back in the arms race?
It's an unproven theory at this point, Anwar, because in this new era of college football, when post-conference realignment, where A&M went to the SEC and Nebraska and Colorado peel off to the Pac-10, making it to Pac-12, eventually like the Pac-16. Like what I'm going to tell you is the theory, but, we have to acknowledge that the theory is untested in a way that we don't know if it actually works in 2021. It might, but it's just a theory. The other thing is, it's been a long time since Texas has been any good, like really good. And so when I say that it's untested, this theory around what Texas is and who it can be was established a decade ago when Texas was elite of the elite, when they were top 5 every year, competing in the national conversation for like a national title once or twice every couple of 4 years. Like they were Georgia, or maybe even like Ohio State, right? Because they won a national championship. So like they had some pedigree that they don't have now, that they let in the 10 years, all of that erode. It's not all eroded, but a lot of it is. And so what's the theory? Well, Texas has to get good, like great. Everything else can't happen for Texas until it establishes it's a chicken and the egg situation. The answer, though, in this situation is Texas, before anything else can happen, they have to be out of this world good. They have to perform not once, not twice. They have to do what Ohio State has done, which is, yeah, we play in a lesser conference. No doubt about that. But when you come here, we transcend that. This is the one place that you can go that's outside of the SEC where you're going to get SEC-like development. and they can throw out all of their first round picks, and they can show where they've been in the playoffs, and they can show where they've won in the playoffs. And that will, and so if you're a kid from the Midwest, you don't have to go all the way down south to have that option. Texas has to prove that it can say what Ohio State is able to say, have some history built up so that it truly doesn't matter whether or not you pick Texas or the SEC from a competitive or NFL development standpoint. And for the elite of the elite, this conversation matters. There's a reason why 75% of all 5-star players and highly rated 4-star players signed to play in the SEC. Yes, they have more schools, but the elite of the elite are buying into this idea that if I go to Tennessee, hey, I'm going to stay in state if I'm from Nashville. I'm going to go to my in-state school and I'm going to get to play against the best of the best and have that brand put on me. Even Vanderbilt gets to claim that SEC banner, and it matters. Look, Texas is in a battle right now for a transfer. Donovan Kaufman, a kid you've interviewed on this YouTube channel. His finalists are Texas and Vanderbilt. Now, I know
Auburn,
that he has, Auburn. I know the former head coach at Vanderbilt is now at Auburn. We know they have connections, but Auburn on paper and Texas, they're at least, I wouldn't say that Auburn has an advantage over Texas, except they are SEC. Except he as an SEC player, and this is another fascinating thing about SEC transfers. And it's why the SEC is so concerned in some ways. If these kids can stay in conference, they absolutely will. When the Eric Gilbert kid, the tight end from LSU, when he announced his transfer earlier this year, he announced it to Florida. And these kids aren't looking to, the good players are not looking to escape the SEC. They will stay in it if they have that option. Surprisingly, the only examples where we've seen this not occur at Oklahoma. And if you can pull off what Oklahoma has pulled off, you can put yourselves in situations where an entire package of players from Tennessee, including a guy in Eric Gray that is absolutely an NFL draft prospect. And that guy might have been the best SEC running back in the country coming back this year, certainly in that conversation. He goes to Oklahoma because in a way, Oklahoma can sell what Ohio State sells, which is we develop our players into first-round picks. We win a ton, and the NFL loves our players. And so Texas is aiming, it says a lot about what Texas has going for it, that it doesn't have these things and still does well in recruiting. Because, Texas does have elite academics, because Texas is in a vibrant world-class city, because it's close to home for so many kids. Like there's a lot of boxes that Texas checks. Unfortunately for the Longhorns, over the course of the last 10 years, being elite has not been one of those boxes. And now when you talk to the 5-stars of the world, you get to say the goal is to be elite. The guys that you're recruiting against say you're coming into something that is already elite. And we have found that is a tough pitch to defeat for the highest of the high-end prospects. And Texas A&M, Anwar, does not battle that. So whatever, they may have to beat Alabama and they may have to beat LSU in recruiting, but they don't have to fend themselves off from that. It's not checkmate, but it sometimes acts as a checkpoint in the game. And you have to use evasive maneuvers to avoid checkmate. A&M never has to worry about that. And the guess that they made was that in the 10 years since they made that jump, that the SEC would emerge as the clear dominant force in college athletics, and they're a part of it, at least in college football. And if you're A&M, you never extend that invite. That's why these teams aren't going to play for a long time. Right now, I don't think either side truly wants to play the game, but I think if there's a side that does, it's Texas. And because you're Texas A&M, and in your entire life, you've never had anything that Texas has wanted, other than a 10-year stretch where they cheated their ass off and got on serious probation. So even the little sliver of time when they were better than Texas for a decade, everybody turns their nose up at it from Texas and says, that was when we weren't cheating and A&M was cheating their ass off. So in your entire life, you've never had an edge over somebody, and now you do. Yeah, you're not trying to close the gap. You're not trying to give them a hand up at all. And until A&M ever finds itself in a position where it feels like it no longer has some, not even all of the higher ground, just some of the higher ground, you will never see an Aggie try to play this game ever.
So let me add one more thing. And this will be the last thing for me. Do you think it'll ever happen? Right? Because I think one of the theories is that if it ever happened in a bowl game, then there would be enough interest generated where people would say, you know what? We should do this more often, right? Because we know what the hype would look like if it was in a bowl game. We know what it would look like there, and you know what the trash talk that would happen afterwards, and maybe that would be enough to get each side like rejuvenated. I mean, would that be the only catalyst? Because neither side is willing to. I don't care what Governor Abbott says. Like, neither side is going to just be able to just sit down and come to the table and say, yeah, because to your point, Texas doesn't want to feel like A&M's doing them a favor.
Yes.
A&M. Because that's big on that. Like, we don't need them. Look at our schedule. Look at the South End zone. Look how much money we make. We've got our own LHM. Like, we're good. We're good over here. And A&M's like, yeah, actually, we're good over here as well. So, but would it take a bowl game to renew the interest for both sides? That's the last question for me.
Here's the thing about the bowl, and yes, these teams will play each other first in a bowl game. There's no doubt about it. The dynamics involved, though, again, neither one of these teams would want to play each other in a world where they have to risk something. So, if Texas is 8-4, they don't want to play a 10-2 A&M team necessarily, unless they're getting beaten badly and recruiting to such an extent that you have to take the gamble, and vice versa, right? In a world where we need something to shake something up right now, even if doesn't last for very long. I could see the motivation of wanting to play that game. Neither of these universities want to play a cheap version of this game. So this won't be Alamo Bowl type stuff, right? It would need to be in a major bowl game so that it's almost unavoidable. So if you could ever get to a situation, and the problem is these two teams have never played. I think the stat is in the last 75 years, these two teams have never in consecutive years won 10 games each. So they're never great at the same time. In a world where each was 10-win good, let's say there's a stretch of time, there's a 5-year window where each of these teams is winning 10 games consistently at the same time. I think that's when you see this game potentially played in a bowl game setting. The problem is these things don't line up historically very well, as I just pointed out. So then it's like the 1 year, let's say they both win 10 games this season. It's like a shot in the dark from a percentage standpoint that this would be the year where it happens, right? Like, what are the odds that the way bowl matchups work that you absolutely know you're getting, let's say, a Cotton Bowl with Texas and Texas A&M. If you told me they're both going to go 10-2 this year or 10-3 or whatever, it's probably like 25% maybe, like on paper, just in my head, like, okay, both of the teams are going to go to a major bowl game. Would they allow it? Would it line up that way, or would the SEC team have to go someplace else in the Big 12? You know what I mean? Like how bowls get decided oftentimes is completely random, and it comes down to picks. And it's definitely not 50%. So it's got to be below 50%. So they need, just like this is my metaphor for this, just like you would need a stack of 5-star classes and not just one to give you the best chance for optimal success. You'd need the same thing to translate from a competitive standpoint with both of these teams. They're not going to play this game if both are average or both are below average. They've got to both be above average consistently, I think, to give it a mathematical chance that it will definitely happen. I think the scenario that I outlined is how we get there. Easiest. Both teams, let's say starting now or in the very near future, start winning 10 games consistently apiece. Then at that point, I would say in the next 5 years, I bet we see the game. But if that doesn't happen, then just add 5 years or 3 to 5 years to it from the moment it does begin to happen. So, maybe 2026, 2027 at the earliest, but as long as these two teams aren't doing that, it just keeps getting pushed back for me.
Well, I guess at that point, I would say all we can do is watch LHM, but unfortunately on LHM, all we see is Longhorn victories. So, you never get to see the other side. But no, it's an interesting conversation. It's a fascinating conversation, Ketch. It's one
that— Anwar, real quick, there's something to be said. Texas, when they played this game, everybody knew it was the end.
Yes.
Nobody talked about it like it's the end for 7 years. Everybody went into that season and said, this is it. You win this game, you get it for eternity. Like that, those were the stakes. And Texas won that game. And I totally understand the vibe of, yeah, man, don't ever let those dudes don't ever play them again. Let them forever know that taste. And that's the only thing they know. Like, I totally get that. It is just a reality, though, that the landscape of college football has changed over the course of the last decade or so, that has A&M in some ways in a higher position with better footing than Texas does. And Texas did not anticipate that chess move when it occurred. But I get it, man. If somebody on Orange Blood's like, I don't ever want to play those sons of bitches again. We won the last game. That's the only memory I ever need, ever. I get it. We're talking about something. There's a little bit of a different conversation that we've had here. And it mostly centers around this idea of the SEC is undisputably the number one brand in college football right now from a conference standpoint. And one side of this rivalry has that and the other doesn't. And you and I just happen to professionally cover the school that it doesn't.
I don't know if I can add more to that, Catch.
Well, I interrupted you. So you
drop that mic that you're holding.
All right. Well, look, man, for myself and Anwar Richardson, thanks for hanging out with us. We'll have more YouTube content here on the Orange Bloods Texas Football channel, maybe even today. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, later.